A couple weeks back, I made a video about players I thought were going to have a noticeable decline for the 2026 season, and you guys seem to enjoy that format, which I will say, once again, was inspired by the YouTube account I Like Numbers. Please check him out if you haven't already. Anyway, I wanted to make a more positive spin on this idea, as was recommended to me by a number of commenters on that video. So, today we're going to be looking at 5 breakout candidates for the upcoming year. Now, my criteria is this: a player can't have had a single All-Star appearance yet, or have finished a year with at least 100 games played and an 800 OPS or better. This makes sure that we're actually looking at potential breakouts instead of just great players becoming outstanding. I will also not be considering fielding as part of the analysis because we're talking about hitting today. With that being said, let's hop right into our first one, Romy Gonzalez of the Red Sox. This already challenges the boundaries of the rules I just set out, as technically, last year, Gonzalez did have an 826 OPS. However, it came in just 96 games and 341 plate appearances, just a little over half a season. And further, I think his potential is actually much higher than these numbers indicate. The principal reason for this is just how hard he crushes the ball. Amongst all players who had at least 150 batted ball events last year, his hard hit percent of 57.3 was 5th best in the entire sport, ahead of players like Juan Soto, Ronald Acuna Jr., Pete Alonso, and Matt Olson, and in the same territory as Ohtani, Schwarber, and Judge. Just a small sidebar, but holy crap, Roman Anthony. What's more, his average exit velocity was tied for 9th best in the entire game, and his EV50, which is the average of the hardest 50% of a player's batted balls, was basically in the same area. Yet, with all these exceptionally impressive advanced stats being registered, how is it possible they only ended up tallying 9 homers in that roughly half a season? And why wasn't his OPS in the same territory as some of those guys mentioned? Well, to put it simply, he has what I like to call Yandy Diaz disorder, being that while he does hit the ball exceptionally, and I do mean exceptionally hard, it is at unproductive angles way too much, including a ground ball rate last year of 50.2%, further backed up by an average launch angle of 5.5, almost 7% below an average hitter. Conversely, his pulled air percent, which is arguably the best predictor of home run success at the big league level, was just 10.5%, over 6% worse than you typically see. The good news is, he doesn't strike out all too much with a K percent in the 35th percentile, which, for a power hitter, certainly isn't crazy. And if we use Diaz as a template here, who is arguably more extreme in the relevant numbers I just threw out, we're still talking about a hitter with a career 128 OPS plus in 9 seasons, as well as a guy who hit 25 home runs last year, and has won a batting title. If Romy can make even a small adjustment to pull a couple more fly balls in Fenway, he could have a major breakout, and arguably even if he doesn't, it still could come anyway, just because of how good his quality of contact is, a la Yandy. And by the way, if anybody wants to question whether or not he should just remain a lefty masher and not an everyday player, consider that last year, despite obviously way better hitting versus lefties with a near 1000 OPS, he still hung in there versus righties with 1 over 700. So I do think he should get some decent run versus both, ideally in 2026. Next up is a guy I think was in the running last year for most underrated breakout from a metric perspective, in Cody Clemens. This is a player who, at the age of 29, generated massive improvements in his average exit velocity, launch angle sweet spot percent, hard hit percent, barrels per plate appearance, and pretty much every expected metric. And it wasn't just relative to his previous career norms. Just look at the amount of beige or red on the screen right now in comparison to the rest of the league. And similar to Gonzalez, he doesn't punch out too much, and even whiffs at a lower rate than the righty. Yet, with all that being said, while he did have a career-high 19 homers, he also slashed just 213, 281, 434, for an OPS of 715, or about league average. But I do think he's got much more in the tank than this, because, you see, ever since he made his debut, even though he hasn't got to play all that much, he has displayed one prominent aspect of his game that runs counter to somebody like Romy. He pulls fly balls in the air at an elite level, with his mark of 23.2% this past season having him as over 6% above the norm, while his ground ball rate sat at just 34.4%, while most are rocking around a 44%. I think one of the big reasons we didn't see better numbers in 2025 was just simple bad luck, as he was the victim of a 30-point difference between his expected batting average and a nearly identical 31-point difference in his expected slugging. This kind of random batted ball luck generally corrects over a larger sample, especially on a Minnesota team that he figures to get everyday at-bats with in the upcoming year. The only real metric massive flaw in his game at the plate last season was his performance versus four-seam fastballs, which he got absolutely blown up against, en route to posting a negative 16 run value with a 158 average, 289 slug, and 28% K rate. But again, there was a massive component of luck here, as while his expected stats of a 206 average and 413 slug weren't elite or anything, they were nowhere near as bad as his real-world results. Meaning, again, based on his profile, somebody who pulls the ball in the air and doesn't strike out all too much, he should see some positive regression to the mean in the upcoming season. I'm just going to go ahead and get the obligatory pick out of the way now, one that seems to be on everybody's list every single season, but that I believe I can provide at least a semi-novel approach to. I'll state the obvious first. If this dude can get his K percent under 28, he'll easily have an OPS over 800 just as a result of that. And further, if he could couple this with a decrease in his ground ball rate to around 40 from last year's total of 48.3, he'd probably easily move into the 900 range. But I've discussed these aspects of his game in prior videos, and frankly, so have a lot of people. Yeah, the dude swings really hard and makes louder contact than pretty much anybody else, but it hasn't come to anything. So why would it this year, especially after a season where he had a sub 700 OPS with a batting average right at 200? This is where I want to put forward a potential fix that I'm sure has been discussed internally that isn't even in association with his actual swing, being instead his approach. And a fairly simple thing at that. In 2025, he actually seemed to become incredibly passive, as he swung at pitches in the zone just 58.2% of the time, almost 10% less than an average big league hitter. Further, he swung overall just 41.6% of the time, almost 6% below the mean, and perhaps the most damning number was his meatball swing percent, or the amount of times he was actually offering at the most hittable pitches anybody can receive, which sat at 67.4, again, almost double digits down from that of the league. This essentially backs up that part of the reason he was striking out so much last year wasn't just that he was cutting through pitches, but that he was allowing himself to get into two-strike counts passively far too often, something that, with just a small tweak in terms of turning up the aggression in early counts, could make a huge difference. After all, if you put the ball in play before you get to 2 strikes, you can't punch out. And with the quality of contact he's capable of generating, it doesn't even have to be against that good of a pitch to be productive. And I don't think I have to state why swinging at more meatballs would be good in general. We'll now hop back to a player with a similar profile to Romy, in New York Mets infielder Baty, who himself was decent last season, having a marginally above league average OPS to go along with 18 homers in 130 games. Even still, I think there's a lot more in the tank here. Like with pretty much everybody we're going to be talking about today, he, of course, has all of the impressive peripherals you'd expect in a candidate like this, including at least 70th percentile savant bubbles in expected slugging, barrel percent, hard hit percent, bat speed, and chase percent. And yet, much like Gonzalez, he was handicapped last season by an average launch angle that was just absurdly low at 5.8. But this is actually why I think he has a good chance of having an OPS over 800 in 2026. It hasn't always been like that for him. In 2024, his average launch angle was almost double that at 10.3. And also in that season, he had a pulled air percent of 18.8, a well above average total that fell off last year down to 14.9. All he really has to do is find happy medium between the strikeout-heavy profile he had in his age 24 season and then the ground ball-happy approach in his second, and immediately his production is going to shoot through the roof. I wanted to mention as well, there actually is a trend with him struggling with putting breaking balls on the ground versus heaters, instead of just being an overall thing on all pitch types, as he had an average launch angle of 10 degrees on fastballs, yet just 3 degrees versus breaking balls, and -7 against off-speed. To me, this could be some kind of swing plane or balance issue that's causing him to drill pitches directly into the dirt whenever they're just a hint ahead of where he expects them to be. And the kind of tweak that can address that isn't as fundamental as one may think. I also think he's going to draw more walks next year due to the fact that he had that aforementioned exceptionally low chase rate, something that didn't produce a ton of bases on balls in 2025, but generally correlates with an increase in this over time. Finally, we come to our last breakout candidate, someone who I think you could argue has the chance to be the most productive player of anyone we've discussed so far, at least from an overall value perspective, Wyatt Langford. I, of course, will acknowledge that in his first 2 big league seasons, he's averaged 4.7 WAR per campaign, to go along with about 20 homers, a 121 OPS plus, and a mid-700s OPS. But I really do think there's a lot more potential for impact than he's shown so far. What makes him special as an MLB hitter is his combination of quality of contact metrics that yielded an above 80th percentile total in average exit velocity, barrel percent, and hard hit percent, the angle at which he makes contact with an average launch angle of 17.5 degrees, and perhaps most notably, his exceptional eye at the plate, with him registering an 80th percentile chase percent last year of 23.4 and a 90th percentile walk rate of 12.9. It's kind of crazy to me that he didn't get an over 800 OPS last year just from looking at those totals, especially when you consider he had an elite pulled fly ball percent of 24.2 and a career mark of 23.6. So what exactly capped him? To me, it was his relatively high strikeout percent of 26.4, a mark in the 16th percentile league-wide, which represented a jump of nearly 6% up from his rookie campaign. This was also reflected in a 29.8 whiff percent versus breaking balls, and an absurd total over 48% versus off-speed pitches, downright unplayable. So was it the league just figuring him out, getting him to flail at breaking balls specifically in locations he couldn't hit them? Well, I actually don't think so. Like I said, his discipline remained elite in terms of chase percentage, and he wasn't missing hittable pitches in the zone, with a Z contact percentage of 83.2, above average. Instead, I think the real culprit is his chase contact percentage, which was almost 10% below the mean at 49.3. Given his overall profile, I simply can't see an explanation for this beyond a single season outlier, especially considering that in his first year, he was at 61.5. Think about it. The vast majority of a reason that a player has a bad chase contact percent is because they're chasing bad pitches, which he doesn't do because he doesn't chase much in general. I expect this quirk to return to the relative mean in 2026, which could, in my estimation, when coupled with his now 268 games of big league experience, lead to easily the most productive season he's had so far, if not one that sees him creep into the 850 to 900 OPS territory. Alright everybody, if you made it this far, I appreciate you watching, and if you did, consider checking out any of these other videos on your screen right now for other content just like this. Also, if you ever see anything you'd like to see me detail in the video, feel free to reach out to my email, basebpoet@gmail.com, and if I end up using your idea, I'll give you a shout out. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.